The year was 2022. Will Smith was giving Chris Rock a beatdown, Hans Niemann discovered a new way to cheat, Elon Musk spent a whole lot of money on a pile of garbage, and Redacted was about to attend a local Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournament. Alright, if you guys have been following this story series, you'll know that I typically like to include the original poster's name for whom I got this story from originally, but in this particular case, the account was deleted. So, we're just going to call him Ben for the rest of this video. Now, when I say Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournament, I don't mean some YCS or World Championship qualifier, I simply mean a fairly small local event. Whilst there was some prizing on the line, typically this style of tournament is aimed towards the more casual Yu-Gi-Oh! Audience and isn't overly sweaty. The reason I'm bringing this up now is it makes how this story ends just sound that much more bizarre. It was the day of the tournament, and Ben had decided that for this event, he was going to bring one of his favourite pet decks, Marincess. And keep in mind, this was still just a few months shy of the major support this archetype got, so at this time, it wasn't exactly considered the greatest deck around. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with this archetype, the goal of this deck is pretty simple. Start off with a small oceany waifu, and then climb your way up to make one really big ocean waifu, who when combined with a field spell and a heart, become immune to most forms of standard removal, making them really hard for your opponent to deal with. Now, despite Ben's deck being a fairly meh archetype, he actually came to this tournament clapping fools, defeating an Adventurer Despia player round 1, then again in round 2, and finally a Zombie World player in round 3, before heading into the final round 3-0. It was round 4 of the event, and Ben sat down at his table and watched his opponent did the same. Now at this point, things seemed pretty normal. There was absolutely no red flags coming from the guy sitting across from him. All things considered, he just seemed like a regular chill dude. For now. And after a small bit of casual small talk, the first game of the series begun. His opponent was on Madolche, another archetype that wasn't exactly considered very good, and certainly not something you'd expect to see in the 3-0 pairings of a tournament. Both players drew their starting hands, and the Madolche player was to go first, only his turn wasn't going to last very long, as he proclaimed to Ben that he had in fact bricked, before passing on essentially nothing at all. Ben was then able to simply set up his boss monster along with a couple of tech cards, but before he could even end his turn, his opponent just scooped it up. Game 2. This game was a long one. Neither player had bricked, and both players had begun engaging in a rigorous back and forth that had lasted 8 or 9 turns. His opponent had already managed to remove Ben's boss monster twice this game, shuffling it back to the deck with Madolche Queen Tiramisu after removing the pesky field spell that was protecting it. But once again, Ben had managed to work his way back up and resummon the Bubble Reef, as well as recycling and activating his field spell once again, and after sending a couple of back row cards, he simply passed the turn. Now at this point, his opponent was on a bit of a top deck mode, as although he had a few cards left in hand, his field was completely empty, and he was left desperately looking for a way to make a play. But thankfully for him, he drew one. He started by activating the continuous spell Madolche Salon. All you need to know for this story is this card remains face up on the field, and at any point can grant you an additional normal summon of a Madolche monster for the turn. Just remember the emphasis on can. He then proceeds to use his normal summon for the turn on a Hoot Cake, which was immediately met with Ben's face down Infinite Impermanence, which is a card that negates a monster effect and negates all spell and trap cards in the same column for the turn. And unfortunately for our Madolche player, he had placed the Salon directly down the line from the Imperm. It was negated. His opponent paused for a moment, clearly realizing the stupid mistake of playing into a potential Imperm column, before deciding to try a normal summon again. Ben raised an eyebrow. You can't do that, your Salon's been negated. His opponent looked up from his cards before stating, yes I can, I'm not using the Salon. I already used it earlier. Oh boy. Now, whilst it is true his opponent could have used the Salon earlier for its additional summon, It is very obvious that he did not, as that would require him to actually declare he was using the effect, as it is optional. It's not just something that is assumed. His opponent had clearly forgotten to declare it, or just never intended to in the first place. He then began to go on a bit of a ramble about why he never actually needed to declare the use of the card. Honestly, someone should have given this guy an improv award for the amount of bullshit he was coming up with. Ben just sat there and endured it, but eventually decided after a few minutes, screw it. It's just a local event, and he really didn't care to argue or escalate it to a judge call, and it would honestly be more fun if the game didn't end here anyway, so he eventually just let his opponent go. His opponent then spent the next few minutes figuring out a way to eventually remove Ben's bubble reef, before swinging in for a little bit of damage and passing the turn. Now unfortunately for our little Madolche friend here, Marincess can be particularly good at grinding out games, considering the entire deck is just built around 1-card starters, to which Ben had drawn yet another one, and proceeded for the 4th time this game to summon out his boss monster, to which he then asked his opponent, "Do you have a response?" Everything went quiet for a moment as his opponent just stared at the bubble reef, before slowly turning his attention towards the field spell. Suddenly he stood up, and reached across the table and grabbed the card, and vigorously dragged off the sleeve. He then looked up, stared Ben directly in the eye, and stated, "You win," and without breaking eye contact, began aggressively tearing the card to smithereens. At this point, the entire room had caught on to what the fuck was happening at the table next to them, and everyone was staring completely astonished by the events unfolding before them. His opponent then picked up his deck box and pelted it directly at Ben, before exclaiming, "It's yours now," before swiftly power walking his way out of the store, without even collecting his 2nd place prizing. The store owner quickly rushed over. "What on earth did you do?" To which Ben responded, I played the game and I won?" Ben had most definitely won the match. Now, as for what happened to his opponent, he did actually return the very next day to collect his deck, as Ben had kindly left it behind. He didn't really hold much of a grudge over the field spell, as it was only like 30 cents anyway, and kinda felt bad for the guy, so he left the deck with the store owner, who had contacted the Madolche player to come collect it. But after he collected the deck without saying a single word, he just left the store and never returned again. And that is going to mark the end of today's tale. In case you ever do randomly see this, thank you so much, Ben, or whatever your real name is, for sharing your story online. And if you too have a story or tale from your time and event you would like to have featured in this series, feel free to write it in the comments down below. Just make sure to leave enough detail and context so I can turn it into a full video. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And if you would like to see more stories just like this one, I've created a full playlist of this series, which I'll leave at the top of the description, or you can click the little card on screen right now. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Laters.